I'm only going to speak very briefly and build on a little bit on what Ahmed said. He's given a comprehensive overview of what's happening there and speak about a couple of the people that I've met when I was there. The first one is Saleh Al-Dafiri, which Ahmed did mention, but not my name. When I met with Saleh, he told me about how he had been arrested on March the 5th because he had been tweeting criticism of the arbitrary detentions that the authorities have been carrying out. He said that armed men came to his home and he was then arrested and held without charge for 15 days before being released and nothing more being said. Shortly after I left, Saleh was rearrested at a mosque after morning prayers and taken in an unmarked car. And his son then went to the local police station to ask who that car was, where he'd been taken, and he was told that the car wasn't registered in any of their databases. Since then, he's been held incommunicado with no access to lawyers, no family visitation, and his location hasn't been disclosed. Another person I met with was Sultan bin Kayed al-Qasimi, who's the cousin of the ruler of Ras Al Khaimah. I met with Sultan at his home to talk about what was going on in the UAE, but he was reluctant to because he said that he was very nervous and he felt that both of us would be in danger if we did so, and the conversation was kept very light and we talked a bit about football and I left feeling a bit strange. Since I've come home, he's been arrested. He was armed guards came to his home, and since he's been arrested several weeks ago, he's been held at the ruler's palace incommunicado under an armed guard and with no access to legal representation or even being charged with anything. Another person who I wasn't able to meet, and Ahmed again mentions as the former chair of the Jurist Association in the UAE, was Ahmed Zabi, who's a retired judge, and he was with one of the seven when he was arrested, Ahmed al-Suwaidi, and he asked the authorities who'd stopped them if he could produce a warrant for the arrest of al-Suwaidi. And when the authorities said no, and there was a standoff for several hours, Zabi was then arrested and has been held ever since, even though a court granted him bail and said he should be released. On the day when he was due to be released, there was a message come from somewhere, and he was held. He has continued to be held. These men are all part of a group called Al-Islah, which Ahmed mentioned, and this means reform, and they advocate a greater adherence to Islamic principles as a way of reforming society in the UAE. In the past 2 years, they've been under particular fire with their offices closed, their board dismissed, and their assets seized. Many more people than I have the time to speak about here have been arrested or intimidated in a covert manner by the security services in the UAE. The reporting of some of the cases that I've talked about in the West has it's been limited, but when it has happened, it's focused on the authorities fighting an Islamist movement in the UAE. And I think that when Ahmed talks about the rearrest of Ahmed Abdul Khalik, it becomes particularly clear that this is about repressing anyone who questions the status quo. Abdul Khalik, as Ahmed mentioned, was part of the UAE 5, which is a secular group from last year, who organised an online petition calling for open and free elections to the Federal National Council and for that body to have full jurisdiction over the lawmaking process. After he was pardoned and released, he has been very quiet in his human rights activities, as he hasn't blogged or anything. And he also accepted taking Comoros Islands citizenship, as mentioned, which I think Al Jazeera reported that it was a deal done between the Comoros Islands and the UAE a couple of years ago, where the UAE paid $200 million so that they could just swipe these stateless people under the carpet. Ahmed is now facing deportation. He was given a choice between Iran, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, or Thailand. And he chose Thailand, unsurprisingly perhaps. And having never visited there, he's now facing the prospect of being deported there. One other example I'd like to give is that of something else, which is of Salim Hamdoun al-Shaheh, who he was on state TV and he criticised the arbitrary detentions being carried out by the state security. After that, he was sacked from his job at a private law firm under the pressure of the state security. It's just an example of just how pervasive the state security can be into all areas of UAE life. And there are hundreds more who've lost their jobs in this way, too many to talk about here. So I come to what the Emirates Centre for Human Rights, what we're calling for, and that's primarily that everyone who is being held currently, their location is disclosed, they are charged formally and given a fair trial, and they are given access to their lawyers and family visitation. We have had a source from inside the Ministry of Interior has asked to remain anonymous, but told us that he believes that those 7 being held have been subjected to beatings and torture, so we're particularly worried about their welfare and the things that immediately we would ask that their family are granted access. Amnesty and Human Rights Watch have called for the freedom of political activists, and Rori Donaghy called me this morning and asked me, he's the part of the UAE team at Amnesty, and asked me to communicate a message that he's fully supportive of what we're doing here today, and that we will be working together in the future to try and raise the profile of this case. Secondly, we would like to call for the fact that in the past, as Chris mentioned, that the citizens of the UAE had their political apathy was bought with the welfare cradle-to-the-grave system of supporting them. But there are some voices clearly now emerging, and that we want them to engage with their citizens when they call for reform and not lock them up. Just speak to them. That's what we would like. Finally, I think that given the fact that we're sitting in London, we should talk about maybe the role Britain can possibly play or not. I think that it's important to realise that there's 1 million of our tourists visit the Emirates every year, with 100,000 citizens living there. And I think the bilateral trade is due to reach 12.5 billion by 2015. So clearly we have a strong relationship with the Emirates, and I think that we should be pressing upon them to deal with their citizens in an appropriate manner in order to enshrine the unity of a young state, because the only way that the UAE is going to have stability in the future is if they engage their citizens in the political process.